Good day, sir. Could you kindly introduce yourself to those listening?
Okay, I am Geoffrey Onyeama. I am the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Nigeria.
Okay. Sir, you would, nice to meet you, sir. Sir, you would agree that Nigeria is the most populous African nation.
It is, yes.
What has been the role of Nigeria in the international community arena?
Well, the role has been quite multifaceted within Africa.
Okay.
For instance, Nigeria has been very prominent in peacekeeping. So within the United Nations, it's one of the major contributors for peacekeeping forces, and also within the African Union. So Nigeria has made a big contribution in that. It's obviously one of the biggest oil producers in the world. Is also very dynamic. We're very dynamic in a lot of multilateral fora, a lot of international organizations. So you've had Nigerians heading many UN agencies, Commonwealth, and a lot of Nigerians working also in those organizations. Nigeria is very prominent and influential in the African Union. In ECOWAS, Nigeria was one of the founding members of ECOWAS. So we have a strong, presence in the world. From that point of view, yes.
Okay. So the next question, sir. So what's Nigeria's current foreign policy all about? And how has it been implemented? And if so, any recent successes?
Yes. Well, the foreign policy really is anchored on the priorities of the government and on the vision of the president. So he's identified three priorities for this government. That's security, that's governance, anti-corruption, and the economy. So the foreign policy thrust at the moment is really focusing and engaging with those three priorities. So regarding security, we were facing major insurgency in the country. So the first foreign policy outreach was really with the immediate neighboring countries. So Mr. President visited those neighboring countries and galvanized them into reactivating the multinational joint task force. And this proved to be extremely successful. So an immediate deliverable of that was that you had 4 countries fighting alongside Nigeria to essentially encircle the Boko Haram, and the word we use is degraded their military capacity to a very large extent. So that was an immediate success from that foreign policy outreach of the neighborhood. Then farther afield, we were able to now re-engage with major international countries, which had not been the case for a certain period of time. In the area of security, I'm now talking about. So the United States and some of the European countries now became much more supportive and willing to provide intelligence and military hardware. So again, that has helped in the ongoing battle with the insurgents. In the then of course other countries also, African countries. So that's been an immediate deliverable and a foreign policy thrust for security. So in the area of anti-corruption governance, the government has understood that if we want to be a successful country, we would need to change the perception that people have, other countries have of us. We need to change the brand, of the country, and also even for us to develop, we have to have good governance. So we know also that a lot of public officials have siphoned off a large amount of our financial resources, and stashed them abroad, outside the country. And, so there's been a major effort to recover the loot and bring those people to justice. So another part of our foreign policy outreach has been to engage with a number of foreign countries to get them on our side, to convince them that this is a serious, government, and to help in tracking down the loot that has been stashed away, and provide evidence that might also help to bring, the looters to justice. And we've been very successful also in that. And Mr. President has, visited a number of countries, and the respect in the high regard in which he is held by a lot of these leaders has facilitated their coming on board and supporting that process. So that's another aspect of the foreign policy outreach. The third anchor or pillar is the economy. So here the approach has been to promote foreign direct investment and Nigerian exports. And what there's been a very deliberate outreach, and within the framework of what we call an economic diplomacy, approach, thrust. We've identified that Africa is an area where we need to trade more with African countries, greater intra-African trade. So we are putting in place certain outreach programs to identify with certain countries and create another economic space through free movement for business people, within Africa, with a certain number of countries. We feel that there is a great opportunity for much larger trade in that direction. And we're also putting in place some mechanisms to promote foreign direct investment. Of course, Mr. President has led the démarche in that direction, visiting certain key countries and signing agreements that will facilitate the greater inflow into the country from these countries. And we've been very successful in that, and have signed some very important agreements with a number of countries. But it's a work in progress, and we're also building other putting in place other mechanisms to help in doing that. Then also, of course, linked to that is the promotion of our economy and export promotion. So we're trying to diversify our economy, as you know, from oil and exploiting other areas like solid minerals, And we understand that we have to have the infrastructure in place to be able to, diversify our economy in agriculture as well, and manufacturing. That we also need to have, the appropriate infrastructure in place. We have to have power in place. We have to have a good transport network, and so we're also reaching out in our foreign policy thrust with a number of countries to sign agreements with them and encourage them to invest, because those are capital intensive areas, to invest in those sectors of our economy that will give us the base, from which to really diversify our economy. And again, we've been very successful in that area, having tied up some very prominent agreements and secured, agreements for foreign direct investment in those key sectors.
I will come back to those key agreements that have been signed. Let me go back to something. You mentioned something about perception.
Yeah.
Like you would know, and it would appear Nigeria is losing steam or influence and a dominance in Africa and on the international stage. Why so?
Well, I think that some of it is a function of diminution of your strengths. So in the past, you look at what have been the traditional strengths of Nigeria. Robust economy at one time. We were and able to reach out and have programs with other countries, and we saw in Nigeria at one time that was in the top 20, 25 economies in the world. So of course the financial crisis, the downturn in our economy, and probably the mismanagement of our economy, has seen us sliding down, and your influence, of course, reduces just as your wealth decreases. Our military capacity decreased tremendously, although if you remember, we played a very important role in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, with our forces. But then, we see Nigeria, we were struggling against Boko Haram, for instance. Our military was incapable of, getting on top of the situation. So, militarily, economically, the perception was a country that at one time some people said was almost a failed state. We had serious governance issues, and so all this, gives a perception of a country that is no longer punching up to its weight, and so your influence to a certain extent also decreases.
Okay, so to the next question. Last year, 2 years ago, and sometimes on social media, someone tends to read, or Nigerians tend to read of stories or tales of Nigerian embassies not having basic amenities and all. What seems to be going on?
Well, I think it's something. Well, there are probably two things. Maybe not enough funding, adequate funding, but also mismanagement of resources. I think those are probably the two reasons. And and employing more people than are needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So to the next question. Also, Nigerians tend to read of sordid tales of Nigerians in the diaspora being maltreated and all that. And most times, the responses from the Nigerian government, the responses have usually been less convincing. Why so, and what has been done about it?
Well, no. I think generally the position of government is you have to take each case on its merit. No two cases are alike. So the general position is that our embassies and our representation abroad are there to promote Nigerian interests and protect Nigerians. And so that is the raison d'etre, the reason why you have your embassies, your consulates, and so forth. So and then of course, if any, a Nigerian has any problems outside the country, it is a responsibility of, the embassy or the representation abroad to assist Nigerians, whatever the situation is. And I would say that in the vast majority of cases, that is what happens. Nigerian missions abroad help and assist Nigerians. Of course, there may be cases where that might not happen, and certainly this government is determined to address those issues and to really be quite aggressive in ensuring that the people working in these missions get the proper training, that there are appropriate people there, and they're held to account for any wrongdoing that they might be engaged in.
So let's talk about the Paris Agreement on climate change. I think, if I'm right, Nigeria signed on Friday, the 22nd of April. How do we implement the Paris Agreement?
Well, okay, Nigeria hasn't signed yet.
Okay.
Yeah, Nigeria hasn't signed. The idea is that we'll still plan to sign, but we haven't signed.
And when we do sign, how do we implement it? How does it affect us? For those who don't really know what the Paris Agreement is all about.
Yeah, I mean, about climate change and the environment. What we have, we propose to take certain measures to reduce fossil fuel burning. So, for instance, gas flaring in an oil, to reduce that drastically. We're going to obviously look at, the cars on the road and, what we can do to reduce the gas emissions. We're going to look at things like burning of trees, firewood and things, and alternatives to that. We're going to look at other kinds of power, using other kinds of solar and wind power, for instance. So moving in the direction of clean energy, to implement the agreement.
Okay. So the next question. The president has been on several foreign trips, but the last trip to China garnered a lot of opinions. There are those for the China trip, there are those against it pertaining to the agreements he signed. What was the China trip all about? And in a nutshell, can you talk about the benefits of the agreements the president signed?
I would say it's only the China trip that was successful. I would say all his trips have been successful because you have to look at them in the context of the objectives and those three priorities I outlined to you. So there were clear deliverables from all his trips. Regarding the China trip, again, all those three priorities were discussed, and we looked to leverage on his engagement with his counterpart to get some deliverables with respect to those three priorities. So again, if we look at security, there was an agreement from China to provide assistance in the security military field. So that was a clear deliverable and benefit. There was agreement, if we now look at governance, there was an anti-corruption. There was an agreement from them to help us in areas of theft of our oil. Of oil, and then also of looted funds, because the Chinese president is also known as somebody who is trying to crack down on corruption in China. So he identified very much with our problem, and so they are ready to help us in that area too. So those are, very useful and clear agreements for the benefit of this country. And also in the economy, China is the second largest economy in the world today, and has a huge foreign exchange reserves. So they have vast amounts of money, resources to invest outside, and they, of course, their development and their rapid development, was propelled by the large number of investments they got into the country. But now they're moving towards investing more themselves outside their country than the investment coming in. Inward investment, more outward investment. So the agreements that we have were varied. Mr. President went with over 100 businessmen, and a lot of agreements were signed by those in various fields, different fields, private sector businesses. Then the government also signed, businesses in the area of trade. So the Minister of Trade signed a framework agreement, aviation, agriculture, science and technology. The central bank, signed an agreement as well. In those areas, and then so those were very important for the country. There was the swap agreement, also with looking at mechanisms to give us more option and flexibility with regards to foreign exchange in our trading, especially in our purchases, and so those were all very, very important, especially with the pressure we have with the dollar, with our dollar reserves going down. Another option, since most of our trade apparently is actually with China at the moment, so giving us that extra flexibility to be able to maybe use another currency other than the dollar in our imports.
Good. Okay. So, what's your vision for the Foreign Affairs Ministry?
My vision for the Foreign Affairs Ministry is this: to really look on leveraging when we have a comparative advantage and delivering that for the benefit of the country. Now, of course, the foreign affairs, there are a lot of things that I would say are routine almost that we do. That is routine engagement with all the countries of the world, in promoting peace and promoting economic development. That will continue. That will be a key. Promoting African integration, greater African integration, sub-regional ECOWAS and African Union, Africa as a sort of a centerpiece of our foreign policy. So that will continue, and promoting, cultural ties with countries, so that Nigeria is a country that is getting on very well, has good relations with countries all over the world, is engaged in multilateralism, in international organizations, and really taking advantage of that. But I think that there are areas that the ministry can develop new initiatives in. And one of the ones that I am most keen and enthusiastic about is in the economic diplomacy, but more concretely, not the theoretical idea of economic diplomacy, but how can we leverage on our presence in 119 countries around the world to deliver concrete economic benefit for our country. And so what I'm proposing is that we develop a database, an architecture, a one-stop shop where any Nigerian business that wants market access in any country in the world can upload details about what they want, either partnership in those countries or buyers in those countries. And in all the 119 countries in which we have Nigerian representation, there will be an official and a focal point to deliver that within the country they're represented in, to promote that market access. And then conversely, foreign direct investment, that same matchmaking database can and should be used for anybody, or any Nigerians who are looking for partners outside there, or any foreign entity, business entity that would like to invest in Nigeria, will be able to see from that database possible partners and possible areas of investment. And as I said, there will be a focal point in each country, in those countries, whose job it will be to make that match. And that can have a transformative effect, on our business. And we would want to expand that to use the same database for also the diaspora, Nigerians in the diaspora, who want to contribute within the country, can also upload, details about themselves, the areas in which they think they have, they can best contribute, and will look for matches within Nigeria to engage them in. So it's really a question of leveraging on a comparative advantage that the ministry has of a presence in 119 countries and translating that into economic gains for the country.
Thank you very much. So the next question, you are the first Nigerian Foreign Affairs Minister to ever be on digital communication and social media communication platforms, engaging Nigerians at home and in the diaspora, and also foreign relations, constituencies and all. So, you are very active on social media. Why so?
Because we're in the 21st century, and the 21st century is social media.
That leads me to another question. What's the social media handle? Because there was a time, there was one handle that was your name, but your surname first, then your first name, then later on your handle came on board. What's your social media handle?
Well, no. You see, what happened? Well, as a minister, once we were named ministers, the first thing was a Facebook account came up with my name, and then again a Twitter account came up with my name. So of course we know that there are people out there, trying to play these funny games. But now we have the genuine one up and running. Okay. And
what's the handle?
Well, I have somebody who's handling it for me.
Yes. Okay. That's good. So to the next question, 2 months ago, for international affairs and diplomacy enthusiasts, what book would you likely recommend for them to read?
I would recommend 2 books, and they are both by Lee Kuan Yew, the former Prime Minister of Singapore. The first one is the Singapore Story. The second one is From Third World to First.
Those 2 books.
Why
those 2 books from Lee Kuan Yew?
Because he's an extremely bright person, very, very sharp. As you know, his academic career was phenomenal. It's very well written, very thoroughly researched and detailed, and it looks at, you get a very good picture of what drives relations between countries, and the linkage between your national development policies and how that extends into, international relations, and how important it is to really study and have a good strategy for engaging with foreign countries, because in the end it will have a major impact on you. And I'll give you an example why I say this. He was one of the first people that saw, or leaders, that there was an opportunity to get in to an opening China. When China was closed to the world and was considered to be, hostile to the West. And it was fascinating reading how he used to visit China, and he alerted certain world leaders that, hey, listen, there is an opportunity there, and it's important to get in early, and how to go about it. And it was just really fascinating to see. It was almost prophetic, but the engagement, and then his reading and judgment, of other countries was also really fascinating. He came to Nigeria very early on, before the first coup, and some of his observations were just so to the point. It was it's a book I would recommend. I would have made it a required reading for every public servant in every developing country.
Okay, sir, to the final question. What's the title of the book you are currently reading?
That's a difficult one, because I finished the last one I read, but I haven't started a new one. I haven't had the time to start reading a new book at the moment. But there's one that I bought that it was actually a friend's book. A former foreign affairs official, who ambassador, who wrote a book. I've forgotten the title at the moment, but that's what I'm threatening to read.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.